The alien observers had seen many strange things across the galaxy, things that bent logic and probability, things that shattered expectations and redefined what was possible, but none of them had prepared for the image before them now, a single human walking calmly into the red silence, as if it were a quiet park and not the most dangerous region on the planet below. They had named it the Red Silence, not because of the bloodstains in the soil, though there were many, and not because of the strange way sound seemed to vanish the deeper one traveled into it, but because of the silence that followed every drone transmission, every automated scout, every exploratory team. Nothing came back, not even fragments, not even static, just silence. The apex predator that lived there did not have a name, at least not one any being had ever lived long enough to give it. It was larger than any terrestrial beast. Its movement left clawed trails in solid rock, its breath melted the leaves of nearby trees, and its roar caused creatures 3 miles away to die of heart failure. The Zoranth had lost 2 ships trying to trap it, and another dozen trying to study it from orbit. Now this human walked right into its territory, with no armor, no visible weapons, no tracking gear, his clothing torn and patched by hand, his boots caked with dried mud, and his face marked by a long scar running from brow to jaw. He walked not like a soldier or a hunter, but like someone meeting an old friend, or perhaps something worse. The Zoranth debated furiously across comms, wondering whether to intervene, whether to beam him out before the predator found him, or whether to observe and gather data. For as long as the signal lasted, the decision was made to watch, to learn, to witness a death that would be remembered for its raw data, if not its meaning. The human moved without caution, but not without awareness. His eyes scanned every rustle of grass, every twitch of branch. His hands flexed open and closed like they were remembering the shape of something once held, something dangerous, something lost. He knelt by a tree with long gouges carved into its bark, ran his fingers along the marks, then nodded to himself as if some unspoken truth had just been confirmed. He sat on a fallen log, placed his pack beside him, and reached inside, pulling out a piece of dried meat, which he chewed slowly, staring into the trees. His eyes did not blink, his body did not fidget. He was still but not passive, like a stone just before the avalanche, like a fuse just before the fire. The forest around him went quiet in a way the Zoranth had never heard, not even on recordings. No birds, no insects, not even whine, just an absence, a pressure, a vacuum of noise. The human stood slowly, not in fear, but in acknowledgement, and looked into the shadows between 2 twisted trees, where something enormous was moving silently toward him. The apex predator had arrived, and the human was still smiling. The Zoranth tightened their grip on their consoles, their sensors struggling to process the human's next movements. They had expected panic, the kind of terror seen in every species that entered the Red Silence. But the human didn't flinch, didn't even tighten his posture. His lips curved into a smile, almost as if he were greeting an old friend. The apex predator emerged from the shadows like a nightmare made flesh, its massive form rippling with muscle, its fangs gleaming in the dim light, its eyes glowing a deep yellow. As they locked onto the human below, the Zoranth held their collective breath, waiting for the moment when the beast would charge and tear the man to pieces. But instead the human continued, smiling, his face calm, his eyes unblinking, as if he were standing in a crowded market, rather than the most hostile environment on Earth. The predator took another step forward, its claws scraping against the dirt, and the human did nothing. His smile never wavered, not a single muscle in his body moved. The alien observers were stunned, unsure what they were witnessing was real. The humans should have been trembling by now, should have been begging for mercy or running for their lives. But this human simply stood there waiting, as if he knew exactly what would happen next. The predator's breath came in ragged bursts, each exhalation creating a cloud of steam in the cold air. It stalked forward with deliberate steps, its weight causing the ground to tremble, its tail swishing behind it like a deadly whip. The Zoranth scanners analyzed the beast's movements, calculating its speed, its power, its deadly precision, but they couldn't find any sign of hesitation or fear in the human. Then, in an instant, faster than the Zoranth could track, the human moved, his legs tensed, and his body shot forward toward the predator in a blur of motion that defied human limits. The apex beast snarled and lunged, slashing with claws that could cleave metal in half, but the human ducked effortlessly, slipping under the strike, and bringing his fist up with the force of a crashing meteor. His blow landed squarely on the creature's ribcage, and there was a sickening crack. The Zoranth recoiled in shock. What they had just witnessed couldn't be real. The human had struck the predator with a power that would have broken any lesser being, yet the human showed no signs of slowing down, no signs of being fazed by the attack. He danced around the beast's strikes, his hands moving like blurs as he landed blow after blow faster than the Zoranth could record. The predator staggered back, howling in pain, its massive body trembling. But the human didn't stop there. He moved closer like a shadow, his feet barely touching the ground, his hands a blur as they locked onto the predator's throat, and he began to choke it out, his grip unwavering, no hesitation, no fear, just a determination that was alien to anything the Zoranth had ever encountered. The predator roared in desperation, thrashing with all its might, trying to break free, but the human held on, his eyes locked onto the beast's in an unspoken challenge. The Zoranth watched in stunned disbelief. The beast that had once torn entire hunting squads apart was now struggling beneath the human's grip, and for the first time, the Zoranth realized the human wasn't just surviving, he was winning. The Zoranth watched in disbelief as the human's grip tightened around the predator's throat. The beast's monstrous claws swiped at him in a frenzy, but the human remained focused, his movements sharp and controlled, as if every strike was part of a calculated dance. The Zoranth scientists stared at their screens, scrambling to process what they were seeing. How was this possible? How could a human stand toe-to-toe with an apex predator that had torn apart entire squads of highly trained warriors? The predator's eyes flickered with panic, but the human didn't relent. His fingers dug deeper into its flesh. The beast tried to shake him off its body, lurching with violent power, but the human shifted with an eerie fluidity, his feet planted firmly on the ground, his muscles rippling under the strain as he pressed harder into the predator's throat. Its roars grew more desperate. And then something changed. The predator's eyes narrowed, and its massive form shifted, its legs bent, and it launched itself into the air. With an inhuman screech, the Zoranth's alarms blared, their scanners recalibrated as the creature reached its full height and towered over the human, but still the human did not flinch. His face was set in a grim line, his body coiled and ready. In the instant that followed, the apex predator struck. Its tail whipped forward like a viper's strike, its claws extended to tear through anything in its path. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth, dripping with venom. The Zoranth braced themselves for the impact, expecting the human to be obliterated by the sheer force of the attack. But the human moved again in a flash. He ducked under the tail strike with a speed that seemed impossible for a being made of flesh and bone. He rolled to the side just in time to avoid the claws that would have severed his body in two. His breathing steady, his mind calm and focused as the predator's savage attack failed to land. The Zoranth watched in stunned silence. The human was no longer fighting for survival. He was fighting for something else, something deeper, a primal instinct that the Zoranth couldn't comprehend. With each blow he landed, with every step he took, it was as though he was stripping away the very concept of fear itself, as if this beast was nothing more than an obstacle to be overcome. The predator tried to adjust its strategy. It circled around the human, trying to outflank him, its eyes glinting with a newfound rage, but the human was already ahead of it. His eyes were locked on the beast's every movement, every twitch, as if he had already memorized its entire pattern of attack. The Zoranth felt a cold sweat forming in their control rooms as they saw the human calculate his next move. He crouched low, his hands clenched into fists as his legs coiled beneath him, and with one swift motion he exploded forward, his foot striking the predator's side with a sickening crack. The beast roared in agony, stumbling back. But the human was relentless. He didn't wait, he didn't hesitate. Before the predator could recover, the human was already on it, his hands a blur as they gripped the creature's throat, once more twisting and pulling with a strength that was beyond belief. The Zoranth were left staring at their screens, their minds unable to process what was unfolding before them. This wasn't just a fight, it was a brutal dance of survival. and the human was in control. The Zoranth could scarcely breathe as they watched the human's movements, each one a blur of purpose and power. The predator staggered back, once more its body twitching from the force of the blow it had taken. But the human didn't pause, didn't give the beast a chance to recover. Instead, he advanced with a calm, deadly precision, his eyes focused on the creature's every twitch and tremor. The predator was no longer just angry, it was desperate. Its body was starting to show the signs of strain. But it was far from finished. It had been the apex for a reason. It had endured and survived countless battles, had hunted beasts and warriors alike. But as the human moved in closer, it began to realize this was different. This fight was unlike any other it had faced before. The Zoranth saw it now in the way the human shifted with a speed that broke all the laws of biology. His body didn't bend or break under the stress. It moved like it was part of the environment, like the human was the natural predator of this land, rather than a creature on the bottom rung of the food chain. The predator lashed out again, its claws cutting through the air in a deadly arc. But the human was already gone, ducking under the strike with an ease that no living creature should possess, his body flowing around the predator's attack, as though it had already calculated its failure before the strike even began. The Zoranth had no words for what they were witnessing, no sensors that could fully analyze the grace with which the human moved, the instinct that drove him. They had never seen anything like it. No species had ever been capable of fighting with such a combination of precision and raw power. As the predator swung its tail in an attempt to batter the human away, the man simply sidestepped, his foot sliding along the dirt, as if he were performing a dance rather than surviving a battle. He grabbed a rock from the ground in one smooth motion, spun around, and hurled it at the beast's head. The impact rang out with a deafening crack, and the predator staggered back, its vision momentarily blurred from the hit. But still the creature was not defeated. It was enraged now more than ever, its eyes narrowed into slits, its body coiling to strike once again, its primal instincts flaring to life. But the human did not back down. He did not retreat. Instead, he moved even closer, his movements faster than ever, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of his breath, each exhale a promise that he wasn't done. In that moment, the Zoranth saw the most dangerous thing they had ever witnessed. The human's eyes were no longer calculating or cold. They were filled with something else, something deeper than mere survival. They were filled with rage, a fury that came from the very core of his being, as though everything he had ever lost, every injustice, and every battle fought had led him to this very moment. The predator hesitated for just a split second, and that was all the human needed. With a roar, the human lunged forward, his fist slamming into the creature's side with a force that shattered bone. The predator howled in pain, stumbling sideways, its body crashing into a tree with such force that the bark split and the ground trembled beneath its weight. The Zoranth held their breath as the apex predator collapsed to the ground, unable to rise. It was defeated not by technology or superior firepower, but by the sheer will of a human being. The man stood over the fallen creature, breathing heavily, his body battered but still standing, his eyes locked on the predator's motionless form for a long moment before he turned away and began to walk calmly back toward the tree line, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The Zoranth knew in that instant that they had witnessed something more than just a battle. It had been a statement, a declaration that humans were not to be underestimated, not ever again. The Zoranth were still processing the event, their sensors barely able to capture the raw brutality of what had just unfolded. The human stood over the predator's broken body, and for a moment it seemed like the world itself was holding its breath. But then the human did something no one could have expected. He laughed. It was a low sound at first, barely a chuckle, but it grew louder as he staggered backward, pulling his hand away from his side, where blood was soaking through the torn fabric of his coat. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and laughed again, this time with more force, his shoulders shaking as if the pain was the least of his worries. The Zoranth felt a chill pass through their command room as they watched him. His laughter was not one of insanity or madness, but of something far more unsettling, a release of tension, a statement to the world that no matter how hard the fight had been, no matter how much he had bled, he was still standing. He had won. The human stumbled for a moment as he took a step back toward the edge of the clearing, his knees wobbling with exhaustion. But his laughter didn't stop. It echoed across the empty forest, and for a brief moment, the Zoranth could see that the man was not a helpless primitive, no, not by a long shot. This was something entirely different, a creature of pure will and unyielding defiance. He turned then to the predator's carcass lying lifeless behind him, his chest rising and falling with the effort of staying on his feet. But he reached down and grabbed the beast's enormous horn with one hand and lifted it like it was a trinket from a child's toy, his eyes scanning the twisted form of the creature, as if contemplating it for the last time before tossing it aside carelessly. The Zoranth were frozen in disbelief. How had this human done it? How had he fought against something that should have been beyond him, something that would have torn apart entire armies with ease? Yet he stood there with nothing but his body, and his resolve, his face expressionless, save for the faint smile that still played at the corners of his lips. The human staggered again, his blood staining the ground beneath him. But he didn't stop, he didn't falter as he walked away from the fallen creature. With slow, deliberate steps, his gaze fixed ahead of him, as if the battle was already over, and he had long since moved past it. The Zoranth began to murmur among themselves. They had witnessed something they had never thought possible, not from a human, not from any species, but there was no denying it. The man had defeated the apex predator, not through cunning or advanced technology, but with his hands and the sheer force of his will. The human moved with purpose, each step measured but steady, and as he walked further into the depths of the red silence, the Zoranth knew that he had left an indelible mark on the planet, and on the galaxy itself, a reminder that there were things far beyond their understanding, and that humanity was capable of much more than they had ever realized. The alien observers felt a wave of unease ripple through their ranks. They had come to study the humans, to catalog their weaknesses, to find the chinks in their armor. But now they found themselves facing an unsettling truth. There were no weaknesses, there was no armor to pierce, only a relentless spirit and the raw fury of survival. And as the human disappeared into the distance, still smiling, the Zoranth couldn't help but feel something they hadn't felt in a long time: fear. The Zoranth sat frozen in disbelief as the human staggered back from the fallen beast, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, his blood mixing with the dirt beneath him. Yet still he moved forward, his eyes locked on the predator's massive form, now lifeless in the grass. But something in his expression had changed. His grin had faded, and in its place was something darker, something more reflective, as though the fight had not yet finished. The predator lay still like a mountain finally toppled, but it was clear from the way the human lingered that he had not yet given it the finality it deserved. The Zoranth were watching closely, unsure what would happen next. What more could he do? What was left for him to prove? The human's eyes never left the beast as he stepped slowly around it, his steps calculated, careful, as if he was taking in the full weight of what had just occurred, as if he were savoring the bitter taste of victory. Despite the damage to his own body, the Zoranth saw that his arms were trembling from the strain of the fight, his body bent from exhaustion, but there was no sign of surrender, no hint of weakness as he approached the predator's head. He knelt beside the massive skull, his hands shaking but steady as they reached for the creature's tusks, his fingers wrapping around one of them as he tugged with all his strength. The Zoranth watched the muscles in his arms tense as he exerted force. The sound of bone cracking echoed in the still air, but it wasn't the creature that was breaking, it was the human's will bending the world around him to his demand. With one final effort, the tusk came loose. The human pulled it free with a grunt of effort, his body nearly buckling under the strain. But still he held on to his prize, as if it was the symbol of something far larger than this battle, something that transcended the fight itself. The Zoranth felt a ripple of unease spread through their ranks. They had studied every species, they had catalogued the strengths and weaknesses of countless life forms, but never had they encountered anything like this, a being so determined, so relentless, that even after victory had been achieved, it still moved with the same fiery determination, as though it were still in the middle of a fight. The human stood holding the tusk high over his head, his eyes scanning the clearing as if looking for the next challenge. His laugh returned, then faint and dry. But it was there nonetheless, as though he were mocking the very idea that the fight had ever been a test of his limits. The Zoranth felt something stir in their minds, something they had not expected, a recognition of sorts, a realization that this was no longer just a human, this was something different. This was a force that could not be contained, a being that had transcended the very idea of defeat. The human did not speak, no words left his lips as he turned away from the fallen predator and walked toward the edge of the clearing, his movements slow yet steady, his blood still flowing from his wounds, yet there was no sign of pain, no hesitation in his step, as if nothing could stop him now, nothing could touch him now. As he disappeared into the trees, the Zoranth remained silent for a long time, staring at the screens, their data processors grinding to a halt, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The fight was over, but it had changed everything. Nothing would be the same after today. The message was clear: humanity had arrived, and they had made it known that no creature, no predator, no force could stand against them. The Zoranth remained frozen in their command centers, their minds struggling to process the enormity of what had just unfolded. No one spoke, not a word passed between them, as they watched the final moments of the human's presence in the red silence unfold on their screens. They could not tear their eyes away from the image of the man walking slowly into the wilderness, still clutching the tusk of the predator, as though it were nothing more than a trophy from some casual hunt. For a long time, the only sound that filled the room was the soft hum of the scanners, the quiet murmur of machinery working tirelessly to update their data. The Zoranth sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to do or how to proceed. Then a voice broke through the stillness. It was soft at first, but its implications were undeniable. "This changes everything." The word hung in the air like a heavy weight. They were not spoken in fear, but in something far deeper, something the Zoranth had never expected to feel when it came to humans. Respect. It wasn't the usual sense of respect afforded to an advanced species or a superior intellect. No, this was something else. This was the kind of respect that came from recognizing an entirely different kind of strength. The human had done something no one could have predicted. No one had ever expected the creatures who had observed him to not only fight and survive, but to do so with such ruthless determination that even an apex predator had no chance against him. It wasn't just about power, it wasn't about size or technology. It was something raw and ancient that had been awakened in that moment, something beyond their understanding. The Zoranth commanders exchanged glances across the room, their eyes wide, their thoughts racing. They had been watching humanity for years, cataloging their progress, measuring their weaknesses, testing their limits. But now they knew there were no limits. There was no way to measure or predict what this species was capable of. There was only the undeniable truth that the human had defeated an unstoppable force and walked away without a mark of defeat on his soul. "Send the message to the council," one of the commanders finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence. "Let them know that the humans are no longer to be underestimated." The order was clear. The message was sent, and as it spread across the galaxy, it carried with it the weight of a warning and an invitation. The humans were not just another species. They were something more, something that could not be ignored. Back on Earth, in the quiet aftermath of the battle, the human continued his trek through the dense forest, his steps slow but unwavering, his blood still staining the ground beneath him. But it didn't matter. His eyes were fixed ahead, no longer on the predator he had defeated, but on the horizon, as if his journey had only just begun. He knew the galaxy would soon take notice of what he had done. He knew the aliens would come, the ones who had watched and waited for the moment when humanity would reveal its true nature. But he was ready. He had faced the red silence and emerged victorious, and now nothing could stand in his way. The Zoranth would not be the last to challenge him. They would not be the first to fall either, because this human had proven one thing above all else: the true strength of humanity was not in their technology or their weapons. It was in their will, their determination to fight no matter the cost. And as he disappeared into the forest, the legacy of the human was etched into the minds of those who had witnessed it. The message clear: humanity had arrived, and they were not going anywhere.